Welcome to Coffee and Contemplation, a Stranger Things podcast. I'm Robin.
I'm Jenna.
And today we're discussing Chapter 2, Vecna's Curse. So starting with Hopper, because we finally get to see him this episode. We didn't see him in Chapter 1, and now we finally get some answers. Except, not really. I have to say, for my money, I don't think there is any way that Hopper survived this. Or at least that he gets out of this situation without serious injury, pre-torture from shrapnel or burns or, let alone broken bones from that high of a drop.
Yeah.
And then I don't even understand how those Russian goons are even there. And I'm not saying that it couldn't happen this way, but I'm just really curious, where does this fit in the timeline with the end of season 3? Just how does this occur? The Bald Eagle team caused a power surge, which made the Russian goons run away from the machine, then turn on the alarm, which caused general chaos among the Russians, and Hopper clears the control room by firing his gun and shouting everybody out. The bridge in the control room remained empty except for Grigori for the entire fight between him and Hopper. There's that shot of a quartet of Russians in hazmat suits watching the gate close. After the gate closes, Joyce goes down to the bridge platform, starts to cry. Murray comes up behind her. He asks where Jim is. They do have to run from a small group of Russians who burst into the control room. But then the place is swarmed by U.S. military agents. And Murray has to shout, "We're Americans!" And there's no one left. But here, in this episode, Hopper wakes up. And, granted, we only get the tease in the cold open and pick it back up later. But he climbs back up to the, that same platform and bridge and finds the Russians just casually hanging out there, waiting for him. The one Russian dude even, kind of casually saunters up to Hopper,
all the time in the world.
Yeah, but aren't there American troops landing on the ground floor? Where are those soldiers that we saw in season 3? I don't know. How did that strike you?
Goofy. It was kind of funny. Even just watching this sequence, the cold open, I thought to myself, oh, this is going to remind me of all the things that annoyed me about this season and this episode, isn't it? That's what this whole watch through is going to be, isn't it? And so I found myself consciously trying to think of positive things and things that I liked, but because man, there's so much in this season that I'm just why did they make that decision? Because let's say Hopper survived the explosion and he's all, he's probably disoriented, what the hell just happened to me? Why couldn't the whatever Russians were left in the base have quickly been grab him, and then that could have been even more disorienting for him to have this more quick and this quick kidnapping, maybe even, get him upstairs, let's go and let's do this thing. And I think that would have fit. They didn't have to do that thing, like you said, where the guy saunters up all smug and knocks him out. That didn't have to go that way.
I don't feel like they needed it at all. I feel like if we had literally opened with Hopper just already in that interrogation room, boom, it makes the Russians that much scarier, because how did they get him out? And one of the issues that I'm going to mention later is that we just see Brenner. We get no explanation to how he's still alive, as from my memory of it.
Right.
So why do we have to go through all this rigmarole with Hopper? This is another example of this season's bloat. You don't need this moment. Now, granted, I know that they filmed this bit with Harbor when they filmed season 3.
Right.
And it was to his insistence. He said, if you want me to return in season 4, then you should get this now while I still look like this, because trying to create it later won't work. Which, granted, that's a really good point. And they did. But I wonder if maybe they felt locked into it. I mean, I get the interest of wanting to show no, this is how he survived. We want to give him more, screen time than Brenner. But I don't know.
They didn't, like you said, they wanted to answer some questions. Here's how Hopper got captured. If we just showed Hopper being interrogated, everyone would be how the hell did he get there? How did they capture him?
It's true.
We have to show him getting captured. But what they did with that scene was created more questions and inconsistencies and things that maybe were retcons, and so why just leave it out. Maybe they could have shown Hopper, that shot of him on the floor kind of waking up, And maybe that could have been enough, at least to show that he survived the explosion. And then you could probably fill in the blanks like, oh, like, I guess there were still some Russian soldiers around and they grabbed him.
Just now, like, this isn't in my notes, but something that just popped into my head was there's that great moment, actually. It's not great for, say, Will or Joyce, but in season 2, there's that one cold open where I believe it's to chapter 6, The Spy. It's when it picks up from the previous episode where Will is on the ground, basically having the experience of feeling like he's being burned alive. The next episode's cold open starts with black screen and all you hear is sound. And it's you hear Joyce yelling his name, you hear the tires screeching, you hear doors opening and closing, you hear scrambling, like you can tell it's the sound of like him being transported. You could have done something kind of to your point. You could have done something like that with Hopper, and like maybe he wakes up in the interrogation room. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
I like that idea. That would have been so cool. Oh man.
I mean, it was real. I mean, granted, the entire cold open wasn't that in that episode in season 2, but I remember it was really effective because it was like, what it does is it says, we got Will from that place in that field to the hospital. We don't need to walk you through the whole thing. It's very efficient. It's very expedient, and it does exactly what it needs to. You do not question it. And then you're off and running into the sequence in the hospital or at the lab. That's all you need. You don't need the rest of it.
And it puts you in that character's head, which is also important. And it helps you kind of sympathize and empathize with them as well. And that would have worked for Hopper's situation too, being tortured in that interrogation chamber,
But moving forward, I kind of feel like for this rewatch and thinking about a lot about structure, because that's something we talk a lot about on this podcast, is I think that I kind of agree with some things that Heidi has said in the past, both about what looked like Hopper's, death at the end of season 3, but also some of the stuff that she said about Barb, and that my instinct is to say that killing Hopper off in season 3 would have made a better conclusion to season 3 if that was in fact the end of the series. But given that it's not, my guess is that they had wanted to use the Russia plot, at least initially, to explore new information. But I want to track that as we move forward, because my memory is that we don't actually discover all that much that at least couldn't have been conveyed or revealed another way.
No, we discovered that they had some demogorgons in captivity and demodogs in the smoke too. They had several things in captivity. That's pretty much the only actual information that's new to us that we learn.
Yeah, that's my memory at this point in the rewatch. But also at this point, I find myself still wondering. This was something I said in season 3. I said in chapter 6 of season 3, I said to Sarah, I find myself still wondering how the Russia arc is connected to the Hawkins arc. Henry's, VH1 doesn't have any connection to Russia that I can remember. So why are we still bothering with it? I mean, just because they chose to delve into it in season 3, I mean, narratively, it still feels like it's only parallel, but not actually intertwined. If Hopper wasn't there, you could airlift Russia out of the plot entirely, and nothing in Hawkins really changes.
This is why I still think it should have been a bottle episode.
Yeah.
I actually think I would have been down for that. I'm not always down for bottle episodes, but I think this would have worked.
I found myself wondering in writing some of this down, like, I just wonder if to some degree part of what's happening here is that they were like, we need to get Hopper and Joyce and Murray. We don't know how to not intertwine them into what else is going on. I think their goal was also to keep people separate. But I also know that the reaction from fans has been, we don't like everybody being separated.
Right.
And that has to do with the huge size of the cast, the huge size of the characters, like just the roster. When I've said in the past about their decisions that they made in season 3, that season 4 kind of suffers from. And I think that this whole thing, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this in chapter 3, because I have some co-hosts coming on to join me for that episode that are not fans of the Russia arc. But at this point, I can see the motivation, like a possible motivation. But, again, the only connecting thread is that the Russians know about the U.S.'s discovery of the Upside Down, that breakthrough somehow, and they're trying to do something with it for some reason. Is that actually connected to Brenner or Owens or 11? Like, where we started in season 1? I mean, no, not that I can tell or remember at this stage. And the thread just feels totally separate. What do we really lose if we remove it entirely. And I want to keep a pulse on that.
I'm interested in seeing if they actually come up with a satisfying answer for that, because that's still possible for them to do that, to connect the threads.
It is.
I'm not exactly like hopeful that it's gonna happen that way, but it's possible. So I'm like, I'll get you guys for this when it doesn't happen. But for now, I mean, just the pacing alone of the whole Russia arc, like I've said, that's what really gets me. It's so bloated.
Yeah.
I do understand them wanting to separate the adults from the kids, though. That's one of the big charms of previous seasons is, kids doing kid hijinks without their parents, kind of babying them and watching over them. That's a big part of the series. So I get that they don't work with the kids until much later in the season. And I do like seeing everybody come together, but I understand keeping everybody separate for a while. I do think they did that for too long in this season. And then at the very end is when they finally got Hopper and the adults back with the kids for like 5 minutes. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, they're still playing around, I think, with the different genres that like each of the groups are in. But I mean, again, I think that since season 2, I just don't think that those lines are as clear as they've been in the past. I don't think that the genre lines are, I think those have blurred a lot.
No, I think especially this season, like it's not at all.
But anyway, yeah, in this episode, they knock Hopper out, they interrogate him in a totally different room, though it looks like it might actually be Russia. And they torture him. They treat it, by treating him as a punching bag and then subjecting him to a gas mask asphyxiation. I mean, right away, like, I know I just kind of said, like, this is all, like, unnecessary and bloated. But I have to say, like, this scene, as unpleasant as it is, I actually really like this scene a lot. Because right away, the tone is totally different from season 3. The bright colors are gone, along with the dopey music, the comedic tone. There's no score even at first. Eventually we get the Russian choral, but here in this scene, it's all stark sound design. Like even the mixing of the dialogue it's different. Like you feel that reverb, which makes you feel like the metal and like the hardness of that room. And maybe some of that was in season 3 as well with like Steve and Robin, but the other stuff kind of got in the way. Yeah. Just the presentation, like this is serious shit. And even though they just showed us that Hop is alive and probably sending Joyce a message somehow based on the last chapter, the stakes feel dire here. Like he may not die in the scene, but we're worried about what, the hell that he's living through.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, it sets the stakes really well. I love the editing in that scene as well. They cut between like his hands and face and then the wider shots. And I think there's like a slow push in and yeah, it worked really well.
This was one of those moments like at the beginning of the season that I was like, oh, I'm on board. Like, especially given that I didn't like that we were doing this on that first watch. I was like, yeah, okay, we're taking all that other, cheesy crap is gone. We're taking this seriously. Good. And it continues through the season. I was really, really impressed with that.
They do walk the line really well in this season. I'll give them that. This whole season, we still don't want to see children getting murdered, even for a horror show like this. This isn't supposed to be one of those really gruesome horror shows. It has to walk that line. And they, for the most part, they do that really well in this season. They do it pretty well in this episode, I'll say.
Yeah, I mean, the stuff of the mask guard Hawkins lab is where it drifts over that line for me.
Well, yeah, I mean.
But other than that, yeah, I would actually agree with you apart from that.
Right.
But yeah, I was so impressed. And even them using that Russian choral, like it feels more appropriate because the surrounding context is less. I don't want to say it's more subtle because that was something I said in season 3 was like, oh yeah, this is super subtle. But it's like, I think because it has depth to it.
Some weight.
Yeah, it has weight. That's the perfect way to put it. And then that's actually a really great transition point into our next group, which is the California crew, specifically Joyce and Murray. I said in season 3 that them sharing screen time was something that was a surprise, like a delightful surprise, because I generally like their vibe together. Just sticking to this episode, I like the stuff of them when they're still in Lenora. I do actually like these scenes where they strategize and talk about, and then they make the call. His speech to Joyce, it could have so easily drifted into being over the top, like being super comedic, like more in the style of last season, but it doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, these two actors are so phenomenal. That's got to be a big part of them walking that line of being over the top or not so perfectly. They're both so good, and their energy together is so fun to see. So I also like these scenes when both of these characters are in a safe environment. They're not going to get hurt in Joyce's living room. They're just being, their silly selves and strategizing. And I love seeing that energy.
I do care about Enzo, and it was funny to look at the scene where they call him and, knowing him now. It's interesting because, like, he is probably the one piece of that arc that I really am glad that we had it for.
It's funny watching this episode. I was actually like, they should have just like not had him end up being a character that we actually cared about. There's already a gigantic ensemble in this show.
Yeah.
They did okay with him in his episodes, so I guess that's fine, but it does feel jarring compared to the episodes down the line.
And I will say that the $40,000 as a price for the exchange, a number that he just happens to have as a college fund for Elle. Like, it definitely seems like something they shoehorned in to get this off the ground.
Well, right.
But I mean, it works well enough.
It's so much money.
I know. It's fun, but it's believable enough to get this part going.
Mm-hmm. It did feel kind of goofy to me, though. The whole plot feels a little too contrived.
And it's one of those things where, like, it kind of feels like we're between a rock and a hard place, because on the one hand, like, the season is already so bloated. Like, okay, fine, just go ahead, get going. Like, just go get Hopper. Let's just do this. But on the other hand, it's sort of like, yeah, but then you have all these contrivances that are, in the lead up to it, like it does kind of feel like they kind of had to just, like, let this one be what it is.
Yeah, there's a few things like that.
Well, and this kind of feels like they sort of end up in kind of a screwball adventure comedy.
Right.
Like, that's the genre they're in, which, I like the tone of Russia generally, but when Murray and Joyce get there, those two tones don't match. And I think that's one area where this season struggles, is like doing the different tones and not making, like, as much as I dislike a lot of the tone choices they made in season 3, I gotta give it credit. It's cohesive. It's more consistent than this season, which is,
I agree.
I don't want to admit that because I don't like it in season 3, but at least it's across the board. Like, it is more or less, it's always at that pitch. Yeah. I mean, there are a few cases where I don't feel like it handles itself as, like, there's tone imbalances in all 4 seasons, even the beloved season 1, but this season really wrestles with it more than any other, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. That fight on the plane is probably the biggest one for me, because the entire time I was literally trying to decide if it was supposed to be a real fight or if it was supposed to be comedic, and it ends up being both. And I was just very confused the whole time.
Yeah. But elsewhere in Lenora, we have the kids, 11, Mike, and Will. Right at the beginning here with the airport reunions, I did note that Mike has signed the flowers from Mike, which was something that I actually hadn't picked up on a first watch through. We get Will and Mike's awkward not embrace.
Oh, so they both did a really good job of playing awkward there. It was fantastic. You could feel it.
Yeah, Will not showing him the painting. It's just, it makes me sad, like, for so many reasons.
Yeah, which is good. I think you're supposed to be.
Yeah, I mean, my idea that I had last episode about having Will be distant. So here's kind of the first follow-up, moment from that idea. So imagine that Mike is genuinely really happy to see Will here. And even he goes in for a hug, but Will is the one who's colder and more distant. Like, it's awkward, but almost like Will doesn't want to be there. Like, I think that would set up really nicely for the conversation later at Rinkomania.
Thinking about it though, if Will really is like in love with Mike, I feel like it actually makes sense because the way that they did do it, because when you really have feelings for somebody, it's easier to romanticize them, put them on a pedestal, and forgive them in your mind. Yeah, and even if they never showed signs of being sorry for whatever it was they should be sorry for. So maybe that kind of does make sense. But if that's the case, it would have been nice to see that a little bit more. Will, as the painter, I'm really willing to bet that the act of painting is probably very I don't know about healing for him, but it's probably a really good way for him to process feelings. And in the act of painting and thinking about his friends, maybe he comes to forgive Mike in his mind before he's even talked to Mike, at least to some degree, because he does get pissed at him later at the roller rink. You know, you never wrote to me either.
Well, and I mean, I think I've said before, like everything that happens between them, starting here, if we were following up from season 2, tracks. But we're acting like season 3 just didn't happen.
Right, exactly.
That's the problem for me.
That's why I wish that, well, maybe we could have seen more of him processing his feelings or seen Mike actually make an effort to apologize for what he said in season 3. But neither of those things happen.
I don't know. It's kind of that thing of like sometimes I'm told when you have feelings for somebody, you deliberately kind of want to not act like you're happy to see them. Like you want to put up barriers.
Really hard to get.
Well, I mean, but not even so much that far, like that extreme. Just like I don't want to give any indication that I like you. I mean, I'm sure that, you know, kind of what you're describing is what they were going for. You know, Heidi said something about all of this in our reaction episodes too. She said, I don't want to rob anyone of the experience of relating to what Will is going through here. So I don't, you know, and I agree with her on that note. Like, I don't want to disrespect that. And maybe that is very authentically displayed here. But I think what I want for Will, like I get what they're going for, but I think it could have just been a lot stronger narratively, thematically, if we had flipped some of this. Like even at the rink, like, you know, you mentioned their argument there. Mike is angry that Will has not been communicating about, you know, with him about Elle's difficulty and or about her lying, and that Will's been a douche to her all day. And Will is saying that he's felt like a third wheel and it's been awful. And just, again, like if you flip that, like I just think it works so much better if this is all because Will was pulling away. You know, when he's like, yeah, whatever, man, and like walks away. It just doesn't feel like Mike to me. Like even after season 3, it just doesn't. And if the exchange was flipped so that it's so literally all the lines that Mike says, or most of them, are coming from Will. So that Mike is saying like, well, you haven't called, you haven't been communicating. And that it's Will saying, well, why is it on me?
Yeah.
Why am I the bad guy here?
They do throw some of that energy, both of them, at each other. But yeah, it's definitely weighted towards Mike putting that on Will for sure. And it is funny, but I like that in some way because they are just teenagers and they don't know anything about anything. And they're all just,
That's true.
all of them are being shitty in certain ways and making mistakes. Elle's lying all the time. You know, even this Angela girl, you know, she's obviously like a terrible 14-year-old or however old they're supposed to be, but like she's still just a 14-year-old. She's still just doing stupid teenager shit.
It's true. It's so easy to forget.
I know. And I think that's a big part of it, that they're just flawed teenagers, not even people, but young adults almost trying to figure out how to do relationships and friendships and all of that. And they have no idea.
Yeah, it's not a great time for Mike and Will.
Or Elle.
Who keeps lying, like you said, about Stacy and Angela.
Lying.
And Will's antenna goes up immediately. And I mean, so does mine. Like and something I found myself wondering about on this rewatch was, and I don't think the answer is yes, but does Elle actually want friendship with these girls? Like, is it actually something that she's striving for, or is it really just about the front, you know, the show of it for Mike's benefit? And I genuinely find that that's kind of some of the crux of this stuff with Angela for me. Is it's like, what is she actually after? Because we never really get an answer.
It is funny. I actually do believe that she wants to be friends with them the way she was friends with Max. She probably misses that companionship. And maybe in her head, she has kind of made this little world where she's friends with these girls and they have a good time. And, you know, because that's what normal people do, you know, and maybe she wants to be normal. But she this is something that comes up again and again in this season and in previous season, the whole thing where Elle thinks she's a monster. That's a huge part of her character arc. Is she a monster, or is she a person, or some combination of both? That's a really big question about her. And I really do wish that they had made that a little bit clearer in this episode, because what Elle wants matters when you consider that question.
I agree. That's a really good way to put that. And I think if Angela had been drawn as a more thorough character,
She's just a caricature.
like that's something we talked about in the first episode, and that continues to be true.
Hmm.
And they just hammer home the same thing over and over and over again.
And it's so funny. Just watching it right now, like just watching her, I'm like, oh my God, these kids have no life. She literally gets to the skating rink and she sees Elle and goes, I'm going to be a bully. And that's the only thing she thinks
Yep.
about the entire time. It's just so over the top.
And something that I found myself also thinking about this episode was comparing the way that they depict Angela to the way that Tommy and Carol are portrayed in season 1. They don't feel like caricatures in the same way. Like, are they as fully fleshed out as like Steve? No. But Tommy and Carol have very little screen time, like barely anything. And yet we get immediately what kind of people they are. There's also conversation about them off screen, and again, as Heidi said, in that season, compliments to the actors because it's a lot in the performance. But they also feel like they are real characters. Like you can actually kind of see what their motivations are,
right?
As base as they might be. And I don't get any of that same kind of internality with, no. If that's a word, with Angela. She's just surface level.
Oh, it's frustrating. I realized too, this Angela girl reminds me of, she really sounds and even kind of looks to me like the girl who plays Libby in Sabrina the Teenage Witch.
I assume you're talking about the one from the 90s.
Yes, yeah. Not the new Netflix one. No. Like her voice is so similar to me. And that, of course, that's a bully character as well. And the show, I forget exactly how many seasons, but we get several seasons of that show. So we do get time to explore Libby's character a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But Libby is a very shallow character for a long time, I think. And she's just a bully and, serves as a righteous punching bag for Sabrina, especially in the earlier seasons, I think. But Angela is, of course, I don't know if it's a matter of we didn't have any time to give her anything else to do, or just this is all we wanted her to be. It's still a little frustrating, even with the short amount of screen time she had.
So I think you're right. I think it's very likely that Elle actually wants that companionship, but I think there's also a level of like, I think this is what I'm supposed to do. This will mean that my life hasn't fallen apart the way that it has. Like I will have something that, like somebody who's normal will have, but, normal in like massive air quotes. But at the same time, she has seen what real friendship looks like, right? Like she was friends with Dustin and Lucas and like you mentioned, Max, but Max didn't treat her this way. But I'm guessing that in Eleven's head, and as we discussed, Max takes Eleven's powers for granted. And that's so much a part of their early friendship is like just, using her powers. So maybe that's what they're trying to establish is that that's what she's going for. But I just have a hard time when Angela has been so awful. And I don't know if that's just part of the teenage experience. That's the friendship I have to get. That's the approval that I need, but
it is weird that that's the angle that they went for. Like there weren't any other people that Elle could have wanted to be friends with. There were 0 other kids there.
Well, and they make no effort to make Angela feel like
someone she'd want to be friends with.
Yeah.
At all.
Even down to something like costuming. Like if they had made her look more like Max. Again, Tommy and Carol, like the way the actors play off of Joe Keery, for example, like they all clearly had chemistry. So like there is something compelling about them as characters, even though they're awful. And I think that would have gone a long way with Angela if they hadn't played it so caricaturish. Like it's just such a baffling decision to me.
And also after Elle smacks her on the face with the skates, she flashes back and she obviously looks like she feels terrible for what she did. And the flashback part was a little hard to read on a first watch through. So you're kind of thinking like, why does she feel so bad? Like, and that scene dragged on. I think I mentioned that before. That one like cut or that one shot of Elle just looking around like crying and like she did something wrong. It just was so long. Why was that one shot so freaking long? And so you're dwelling on that. You're thinking, why is she feeling this way? Why is she maybe feeling so bad about this, hitting this person in the face with a skate? She kind of deserved it, and maybe it'll teach her a lesson, she'll be fine. If they'd given her something, we kind of maybe would have understood Elle's feelings a little bit more. But I think that she's flashing back more, which is why they dwelled on that shot.
But is she, though?
I think so.
Later on, I think we're meant to believe her when she says she doesn't remember.
I don't think she remembers everything. I think that's what she meant. Like, she might remember images, but she doesn't remember the context of them, what's going on, or where she was during everything. But maybe she remembers, or she's starting to remember. That's how I took it.
It's a little bit unclear. It's a little bit murky.
Right.
And again, as we have tracked through this podcast, like they've played very fast and loose with their flashbacks and cutaways in moments like this. And this is an example of like where I think it begins to get a little bit confusing, because like how are you using it in this case? Like there have been very clear examples of when they have used these type of flashbacks and cutaways as the person who's on camera is remembering them. But there's definitely other examples where that's not the case. I feel very uncomfortable with the whole thing of her hitting her in the face with the skate.
That was the next level.
I know a lot of people, like both like in the fandom and then also people I know personally, who for them that moment when she says when she hits her in the face, that their reaction was a fuck yeah. Like they love it. They feel it's triumphant. They enjoy that moment. I don't know if it's just the filmmaking effects of what they're going for in that moment, like working on me, but I don't feel great about it. I don't like the mixed messaging of it. I don't like this idea of like, I feel like they don't have a take, they meaning the Duffers. I can't tell what their stance is on something like bullying.
I can't tell what their stance is on everything in this show.
There's also that.
One of the strongest themes right at the gate in the whole show was the theme of otherness, and how those 4 kids playing D&D in the basement felt like they were others compared to the rest of school or whatever, and how Elle feels like an other. So you'd think that something like bullying, I mean, that goes hand in hand with that. You'd think that they would, be able to link those themes up and make them pretty strong, if of anything in their show.
So I don't know. I've wrestled with this, even like planning to talk about it for this episode. I have a hard time articulating why, and I'm still not totally able to do it, but there's something about this moment that it doesn't feel triumphant, and not just because Elle, like, you described that shot of her reacting, even though she clearly can tell, like, oh, I've gone too far. We already saw this, at the risk of being a broken record. This is exactly what she does in The Lost Sister, because part of this is not her standing up to a bully. This is revenge. It is portrayed as revenge. And that's why I say we saw this in The Lost Sister. She goes into that apartment to kill that guy because he hurt her mother. And then she starts to choke him, and she realizes, if I do this, I become the monster. I become the very thing that I set out to destroy. She made that choice. So here, we're getting the exact same beat, and it's nowhere near as powerfully executed. I get that they're setting up this narrative. Like I said last episode, the Massacre at Hawkins Lab is the centerpiece of the season. So I guess this moment, like I would have rather, like again, this is a whole section. This whole thing with Angela at the rink, it's like it could have been condensed. I don't know why like something that Heidi has said is that the way she taps into her power is anger. I understand we want her to get to her lowest moment. She needs to scramble off the floor. I mean, I also want to echo what you said in our reaction episode about like, go out there and help her, Mike and Will. But at the same time, I feel like this sequence could have been so much stronger if she had been reactionary, that even without her powers, or I don't know, it occurred to me, what if we saw a glimpse of her power here? I mean, and again, we've seen her kill people before.
Right.
So, I don't know. It just, all of this is so like all over the place. And I feel really, this is one of the first examples of where I feel really messy about this sequence. And maybe I'm overthinking it.
No, it's a really messy sequence because there's so many things that you could draw from going into it. So I actually interpret some of this as being like her still learning social boundaries. She's killed people before, but that was when she was basically like an escaped lab rat and didn't know really.
There's this article from Collider where they credit this as being a Carrie reference.
Well, the milkshake, that's supposed to be a Carrie reference, but after that,
yeah, because the whole idea of they dump the pig's blood on her at prom and then she reacts.
she unleashes hell.
Again, it's reactionary. So they were saying that, like, the quote I have is, Carrie is understandably upset and is at a breaking point when she uses her telekinetic powers to wreak havoc. Unfortunately for 11, her powers are dormant at this point, so she opts for the roller skate to the head instead. So the idea, like, if that's what they're playing with, like, again, why are we opting for the reference here? Like this, like their own internal storytelling, I think should have been the lead.
Well, and also, what if she didn't get revenge at all? I mean, what if she just felt powerless the entire time?
Well, and again, like I think you and I talked about this in the reaction episode, but the idea of, like, really the only point of all of this is to get 11 arrested so that Owens can come and get her.
Yep.
Which to me also strengthens the idea of, like, if something really weird happened there and she did, like, actually tap into her powers, like, to me that would have been all the more reason, like, why Owens would have been alerted. But I just don't dig it. I don't like this.
Of course, I hate the way that she goes back to Brenner and Owens and them at all. I wish that never happens at all. So what if they had dealt with it all on their own? That would have been a completely different season, but I think it would have been better.
Well, I mean, I think you still could have had Owens, like, swoop in and get her, like, because ultimately the whole reason he goes to get her anyway is because of what's happening in Hawkins. You don't need any of this. Owens could have just had his people show up at their house in Lenora. At least that's kind of my read of it. I really feel like all of this is just, I could do without it.
Absolutely.
I don't, and I'm trying not to, Monday morning quarterback too hard on this, but it's just.
No, I'm here to tell you what you should have done differently. Again, because there's so many things happening. Is she flashbacking? Is she just feeling bad for what she did? Or does she feel like, is she doing the Am I Monster thing? Like, what exactly?
Okay, leave nothing, change nothing else. Maybe intermixed with the flashes to the Hawkins massacre, include some of the flashbacks to season 2. That alone would have done so much work for me. You would be acknowledging we've been here before. This is we're following up with that, but they don't. They're wanting to pretend like that never happened. So I mean, we'll see if they change their minds in season 5. But all in all, I'm not a fan. I didn't like it as an ending note to the episode either. But shifting out of that, the only other characters we haven't addressed in the California crew is Jonathan and Argyle. And the scene of them hitting golf balls. We talked about that a lot in our reaction episodes, but so I don't want to spend too much time on it here. But I mean, ultimately, yeah, it's still a mixed bag scene to me. Do you still feel pretty much the same as you did in 2022?
Yeah, I think so. I understand why people are upset about Jonathan's character change, but I'm actually on board with the idea of his character changing. I'm not on board with 100% the way they did it, but I mean, why not have character arc?
Right.
And now he's got room for more character arc as well. I like that part about it a lot. I love the way Argyle yells at him, don't lie to her, tell the truth. And he's like, oh, tell the truth. Like, it's that simple. Like, yes, it is. It's so funny because, like, it's so true.
I didn't realize until you just said that how much of it, maybe this is me just really super, like, getting to the party late, but just how significant of a parallel that is between Jonathan and Mike.
Yeah. No, I was thinking that the whole time between Elle and Mike.
Mike not wanting to his whole monologue at the end of the season about, like, I don't know, that's just an interesting, the idea that he's like, I can't be honest with her. So I guess maybe that's, like, the theme of this whole group at large.
Yeah, honesty, truth, and lies. Yeah. Everybody's hiding things. I can get on board with that.
I do like a lot of the ideas in this scene. I like what they're playing with, that Jonathan feels aimless and lost and trapped, and he's unable to cope with that by doing anything other than escaping into getting high. Like, that all works for me, like, conceptually. Yeah. I don't think that all those ideas mesh super well together with The concepts are great, but the execution, not so much. Like it, and I don't think, I think I said in our reaction episodes, like it could have been tweaked just a little to make it work a lot
Right.
better.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Because even the whole, like, I need to be there for my family thing kind of falls a little flat if Jonathan is just
Right.
high all the time.
Exactly. Like that at the dinner conversation in another episode, I think the next episode, where he's just like not even there. I need to be there for my family, but he's just completely absent. Like, dude, do you hear yourself?
Yeah.
And that is something that I like, though. It's a character flaw that I can get on board with, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It's the other stuff around it, like the not wanting to
Yeah.
go to college. Like, okay, well, like I almost think it would have worked better if like he's almost fighting resentment towards his family. And that's part of what's driving him to this. Like, I'm tired of having to be there for everybody. Take care of
Well,
yourselves
that's
for
just
once.
that's not who he is,
I know,
apparently.
but it's this is what I mean. Like they don't
Right,
really,
right.
it doesn't all jive together. Like
Exactly.
it's all good ideas. It's just like they don't quite sell it. But
I do like this scene because I like the dynamic between the two of them. I think that's kind of
100%.
what sells the whole scene for me. So I love
Yes.
that. I love them yelling at each other about stuff.
Well,
And you're right. Did we talk about this before when Argyle says, "You're my best friend, man," and like we just kind of skip by that? Like, oh my God, I forgot about that. I forgot that he says that.
yeah,
What a missed opportunity.
that's a beautiful moment. And you're right. They just skip right over it.
Like, okay, thanks, man.
Yeah, because if they'd also said something about that being mutual, I mean, maybe Jonathan kind of sits with that, like for just a second, like the idea that he hasn't really had his own life, his own friends, his own anything since he was a kid. And that Argyle reminds him of that. Little bit of that would have gone such a long way. Because, the two of them are brilliant together. Like, I love the back and forth of the, like that
Exactly,
exchange is
yeah.
great.
It's so good.
You know, my notes say it could have been, but I think it actively does create an interesting parallel to Steve and his friendship with Robin. Like in terms of how valuable a platonic friendship can be, I think they could have gone further with it with these two. But at the same time, like this is kind of their vibe. They get high together and that, so.
Yeah, yeah.
Again, I don't love the execution, but I actually like a lot of what they're exploring.
Yeah, me too.
Speaking of Steve and Robin, let's head out of the West Coast. Let's go back to Hawkins. So I actually don't have a lot to say about Steve and Robin until they kind of team up with the kids. I mean, they got the scene of them at the store talk. I mean, well, I'll say that off the cuff. I didn't have any notes about that scene, but I will say like just this was so much of what I had been hoping for at the end of season 3. I was like, I want to see more of them being friends. I want to see more of like what does their relationship look like. I want to just these two are so good on camera together. I love everything about this vibe. It's one of the highlights of season 4, and it's like this is a prime example of that.
Yeah.
I feel like this is also a good moment for me to also comment on the fact that, I mean, it comes up a lot more later on in the season, but I think it's evident here. I know that there's a lot of people who do not like Robin in this season. They don't like the way they took her character. They don't like this social awkwardness that they gave her.
She was socially awkward before.
Well, I don't know. That's kind of what I hear a lot of people say is that they didn't see any evidence of that in season 3, and I don't totally agree with that because I think we even commented on it like at the end of season 3 when Elle is in pain. What we said at the time, Heidi and I, what we said was we like that we get to see this flip between she and Steve when, because she's like awkward, like the girl in my softball team, or she got really hurt, and but she was okay. Like, and Steve's like, Robin, you're not helping. She's been calm, cool, collected like most of the season up to that point. So we then see, well, now she's with a bunch of people she doesn't know. So I feel like you see a little bit of it there. But even if we didn't, I don't mind it. I like Robin. I like how they've portrayed her. I don't mind this change. I never feel like this is a whole new person.
Yeah, I don't feel like that, like she's a whole new person either. I guess I can see some differences, but no, all in all, it feels like her still to me.
Plus, the context is totally different. Like before, they were kind of cut off from everybody the entire season for the most part. So this is just, it's a different environment. They're in different places in their lives. Like her relationship with Steve is totally different. So yeah, like she can be more vulnerable with him because she's not like hating him the entire time.
Yeah.
You know, like it's just a whole different vibe, and I enjoy it. Considering how much I felt differently about where I thought their relationship was going in season 3, and then, you know, how I felt about it at the end of season 3, like I'm just so happy that it went in this direction. I love it so much. It's a great addition to the show.
Yeah. Then Dustin and Max show up, and of course we know that Dustin is like Steve's little bro, and so the dynamic between all of them really works well. Max is definitely an odd one out this season, but that's done on purpose because she's isolating herself from everybody. So that's an interesting dynamic when the four of them then get together.
Yeah, the base of operations. I mean, I could have done without, like, when they are uncovering Reefer Rick, you know, I could have done without the, like, Steve's just hitting on babes and not helping thing. I just, what does it add? I just don't feel like we needed it.
The payoff would be Steve and Nancy getting together, or at least Steve wanting to get with Nancy, even if they don't ever actually get together. That's what they're driving at. Steve needs a partner or whatever, you know.
But I don't like the idea that they're doing that at the cost of him, like, being part of the team. You know, his point about the cops having Reefer Rick's record, like, that kind of, like, every time I've watched this scene, I'm like, right, that's what's going to lead Robin to her idea of looking through their records. And it's not. There's, like, a whole thing in between those two. And I'm like, guys, like, that's your connecting point. Like, and again, if that had been their connecting point, it would have been another, like, point in their favor of Steve and Robin make a good team. Like, I don't think by having Steve not hitting on these women in this scene, I don't think we lose anything. Like, we still, it was established perfectly fine, or at least only do it a little bit. Like, I don't think you need to, again, do it at the cost of him, like, being completely uninterested in the investigation. I mean, I know that's not his strong suit, but I don't know. Why did we have to kind of make him look stupid? And
right. And also that's like a more, I don't know, skeezy thing to do. I mean, I guess like it doesn't hurt to shoot your shot, but like just hitting on every girl sort of in your age range that comes into whatever place you happen to be at, it's a little bit like, oh my God, really?
Well, and it is regressive. Like, again,
Yeah.
because it's exactly what he was doing in season 3. And it seemed like in chapter 1, we were getting this impression that he's doing really well with women.
Right. So what did this scene even do for that? Yeah,
right.
That's so funny. That's so weird.
Like, whatever. So before we get to finding Eddie, though, because I definitely want to talk about that towards the beginning, like with the aftermath of Chrissy's death, before our new team, you know, teams up. Very much kind of like what we were saying about the Hopper stuff. Like, I like that when the cops arrive at the Munson trailer and Powell and Callahan, they find Chrissy's body, like, there's no humor here. There's no joke at Powell or Callahan's expense. And this was probably the first occasion where I really felt reminiscent of season 1. A lot of people have said, like, a lot of the fan reaction has been like, season 4 is so much like season 1. I don't generally actually agree with that, like, on the whole, but this moment really does. Like, it reminded me of particularly when they find Benny's body, even though this moment is way on the, you know, way higher on like a horror scale. It just, there's something about the way that it's handled and that it's so early in the season. It just, because I believe they find Benny's body in chapter 2. I think I'd have to look that up to be sure, but it's around that time.
Well, it's something to do with, you know, the cops who don't actually know what's going on, finding the thing and the evidence, their first sign of the thing going on. That's kind of the parallel there.
Yeah, it's just really well handled. And I love it. I don't know about you, but I love that rotating transition into the overhead shot of the body being loaded into the truck.
There are so many good transitions in this episode from one group to the next. So many. And yeah, that's probably my favorite one.
Yeah.
Nancy and Fred walking out of the school. And then that transitions to the aerial shot of them pulling Chrissy's body out of the trailer. That's the one I was thinking of.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we get that upside down shot for just a second there.
It's beautiful. It's such a beautiful transition. I love that. So kind of on that note, I will say that this episode was directed by the Duffer Brothers. They also wrote it
and written,
yeah. And but there was a staff writer on this who's credited, and that's Caitlin Schneiderhan, and then, which is a name I have not come across before. And the cinematography was by the the same director of photography as chapter 1, Caleb Heyman. That definitely, I feel like you can definitely tell. It's absolutely like there's a style at play here.
Mm-hmm.
I also like genuinely, I really love that scene between Dustin and Max when she shows up at his house. The way that she confides in him about Eddie and Chrissy, like I like the way that scene is written. I like the way that that conversation feels so organic between the two of them. And like I think that is a combination of the writing and then these two just being absolute awesome actors.
Yes,
like
they are definitely pros. You can the experience just shows through on both of them, and they play really well off of each other.
I mean, I said it in season 3, like you put Matarazzo with anybody, but especially like Sync's performance this season. But I love their platonic chemistry. I really like these two, so I'm glad we got time with just the two of them, because it's not a team up that we've really gotten up to now.
Right, yeah. I mean, Max doesn't really get teamed up with anybody hardly ever if it isn't, Lucas or sometimes Elle.
Mm-hmm. And Dustin wasn't with this group all last season. So it's really cool to see him get time. I said in chapter 1, like I liked seeing the vibe of him with Mike and Lucas. And I like that this is another example of like a conversation that feels balanced. You totally understand where Dustin is coming from in terms of like, you don't know Eddie like I do. Like, there's no way he did this. And Max being like, yeah, but I saw what I saw, dude. But then also like...
Yeah, and she has some really good points in that conversation as well, though. And he's just like not listening.
Well, except that he does eventually. And I do like that. And that then eventually she confides in him and says like, but he was scared. And so they're like, well, I guess we got to talk to Eddie. And then hence the base of operations. And then they find Eddie in the boathouse. I'm just going to be transparent. I love everything that happens in that sequence. It feels kind of like something you would have to do in a D&D campaign. Like, this feels like, all right, we got to roll for perception, roll for investigation.
Roll charisma even, when they're trying to convince him to put the knife or whatever down.
Yeah, exactly. It just felt very D&D to me. In the best sense of, and like searching for clues and like looking around and snooping, like, yeah. But it did make me wonder. I don't have a problem with this, but I'm curious as how this struck you. Why does Eddie jump out? Because I watched it a second time just to be sure. Like I watched the scene twice. Like Steve had just stopped poking the tarp with the oar.
But he doesn't maybe know that because he can't see them, right? So maybe if he's hiding and he can't quite see them, he's thinking, well, I have one shot to at least try to defend myself, catch him off guard.
But at the same time, I was also thinking like, in a way, given how much emphasis, there is this season on Eddie being a coward, like I want to call out this moment as courageous because, to your point, he can't see through the tarp. So he could have just tried to stay hidden and then like had the thing, like if they pulled the tarp back.
Yeah.
But I love when Dustin says, Robin from band, and her little like
so goofy. That's such a her thing to do.
I almost wonder if Hawk improvised that.
I was actually thinking that when I was watching it. Like I bet that wasn't in the script, and it does work. It definitely is an awkward Robin thing to do.
And like or maybe they tried it a couple different ways and that's the one they went with. But yeah, man, just like the performances across the board here are great.
It's a little melodramatic, this is the one scene where you get to melodramatically tell somebody that there's supernatural things happening and that about it,
Yeah.
So you only get to do this once with a new person. So they went for it, and I guess it walked that line, but they didn't quite cross into too melodramatic for me, but it definitely was a bit melodramatic. I think it worked. It was really fun.
Well, in terms of, we've debated what are the how can you do stakes like without the end of the world and death and destruction. I actually think this is another good example of like the stakes in this moment are very personal. They're very small, because it isn't just Steve can be hurt in this moment, which is true, but it's also like, no, we genuinely want to know why Eddie is so afraid. Like it's about, we need to communicate. And I thought they handled all of that in that first part of the scene really, really well.
There's even stakes in them explaining to him what's happening, because anytime you tell somebody, yeah, there's these supernatural monsters attacking our town constantly, you risk them not believing you and, like, blowing it wide open in a way that you wouldn't want. I guess with Eddie, since he didn't think they would believe him, there was that reciprocation. So that worked out for them, but there's still stakes for both of them in telling their truths to each other.
Mm-hmm. I love that Quinn, plays with his hand still trembling. Like, that's just a nice touch before he pulls the bottle back towards him. But when Dustin tries to take it, like, I noticed his hand trembling.
His expression that whole time is so many things at once.
Mm-hmm.
He's cornered, he's scared, he's desperate, he's willing to act. He also is doubting himself the entire time. There's so much going on there that you can just see on his face. He does it so well.
And I think there's also some like active resentment and anger. Like, I think in that moment, he's like,
he knows that people are going to be out for his blood. And, he's so like, no one's going to listen to me. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we'll circle back to that when we tackle Nancy and Fred. But at this point, I want to transition to Jason and the basketball team. We get the whole bit where Jason is questioned by Powell and Callahan, and they basically reveal like all this stuff about Chrissy and that she's dead, that she was with Eddie. He storms out and he has this meltdown in the woods. And at that point, I kind of get it.
For one moment, we actually feel bad for Jason.
Exactly.
Just for a moment.
Just for a moment. Because if they hadn't gone any further than that, like, fine. Like, he just found out his girlfriend possibly was hiding drug use from him, and, of any possible level of severity, that she might have been cheating on him, and that person that she might have been cheating on was, on him with, was Eddie, who appears probably killed her. Like, and that's a lot for a kid to take in all at once.
Yeah.
And the problem here is that, like, Jason doesn't process any of this. He just kind of stays at this pitch. Like, he lets it fuel what we see are unhealthy, harmful views and actions, which, to be fair, colors a lot of this moment differently too, in hindsight. Speaking of like cinematography and stuff, like, I really love the overlap of of when the U.S. government lands in Hawkins, like, reviewing the crime scene, all intercut with Jason rallying up the basketball team with, like, talk of Eddie and leading a satanic cult. Like, seeing those similarities and differences at the same time between the government and these kids at, like, this street level, setting up the danger of both.
Oh, yeah.
How we'll see both groups do despicable things in the season, as the season progresses, both misguided and self-aware, or lacking self-awareness, I guess. Like, Jason convincing the team to go hunt some freaks, like, this whole section.
It's a really good parallel.
Yeah.
This was the first sequence that made me go, oh, we're going to have one token Black person in every single faction. Because there's one in the helicopter lands. The leader of that group is the Black guy. And then they meet three guys coming up to them. One of them is a Black guy. And then you go back to the basketball team and there's the one Black kid on the basketball team. I was like, okay, I got to keep an eye out for this down the road. And man, it doesn't get better.
But yeah, like, the danger of mob mentality and not listening outside your own political worldview.
And that's such an important theme. That one, I guess, came out really well in this particular sequence.
And again, like, all of this stuff, like, it doesn't have the cartoonish vibe that the Russians had last season. Like, you can see exactly how Jason gets here and why the team buys into his speeches. Like, it is a little rushed. I think we talked about that previously, but this is exactly why this shit is dangerous. Plus, they're kids on the verge of adulthood, so they're dealing with that feeling of, like, we have agency, we can do something about this, and how put into the right direction, or I should say the wrong direction, how that's also very dangerous. And Heidi and I disagreed about some of the stuff with Lucas. You and I also agreed about Lucas, disagreed about Lucas, but for different reasons. But this bit, I buy that he stays, because even though I do read the scene as Lucas is definitely not okay with what happens here, but his reaction strikes me as angrier than how I read it the first time through, but also scared. And while I don't love it for Lucas, or any of the Hellfire Club members for that matter, I do love that sense of danger that all of this invokes. Like, already, this early.
Oh, yeah. Jason is a way more scary villain at this point than Vecna.
100%.
He's so real.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like their street level villains are always really strong.
Yeah, yeah. Billy.
You know, in season 2, Billy specifically. You know, I said in our reaction episodes, Jason feels very much like an escalation of that character.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
I really, really like the way that this feels at this point in the season. And Luke is trying to talk to them, you know, and trying to talk them down. It puts himself and, let's be honest, puts Erica at risk. And this, you know, I don't read his behavior here and his sticking around as being about being cool anymore. Like, it's flown way past that. Like, this is about safety and community ostracism now.
You know, I actually think it's both.
Okay.
I read him as he's testing their boundaries a little bit by saying these things. He's like, you know, I'm in with these people, right? They'll listen to me, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't quite pass that charisma check, but he's testing to see where they will land when he says this.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm kind of in the middle there. Yeah. By the end of the scene, I'm like, well, you've got your answer there.
Right.
So, you know.
Yeah. But I think that that's the reason that he doesn't bolt. I mean, frankly, watching it again this time, I was like, I'm not sure that he could.
Right.
Ultimately, this all strikes me as him having a freeze response rather than a fight or flight.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I think if they had rushed him out of there too early, like, I do think he's probably in recon mode, or that's going to be
Right.
that is kind of his next shift.
Yeah.
But I read him as afraid. I read him as like, I didn't realize, and now I don't know what to do.
No, I agree with that. And I think he's a little shell shocked that these people that he thought he was in a group with are not quite agreeing on him with him on this on these things.
Mm-hmm. And just that parallel of, like, you know, the fact that they're like, these people don't, they think all this real, like, satanic shit. I'm like, it, whereas they're actually a lot more grounded, and here they're the ones flying off the handle, like, going to extremes.
Don't even get me started. Don't even get me started on that. We can go down this road for a long time.
Yeah. And maybe we will later on.
We'll see.
And then, yeah, so our last group to talk about is Nancy and Fred to round out our Hawkins group. So I liked that when Nancy and the rest of the Hawkins High newspaper team are watching the news, that there is that reminder of Barb's death after they mention the curse.
Right.
I really like that a lot.
I think that we need that in some way for Nancy specifically.
Mm-hmm.
People are going to forget that Nancy has this major motivation behind all of her actions. I think that's so important for the audience to remember Barb, but also to remind the audience that it's a big motivator for Nancy.
100%. Yeah, the best follow through that they've ever done with any character death has been Barb. When they get to the trailer park after Fred's been questioning Nancy about Jonathan, the sequence in the car with the police officer, and when Fred starts to hallucinate, you know, I'm on record as saying I don't like horror, but this is all really well done. I mean, it's not subtle, but I kind of dig it. Like,
right?
I really like the way this plays out. And I remember liking how on first watch, it was like being intrigued and being slightly frustrated by, like, what is going on, but not in a hugely negative way. Like, this was really setting up the mystery really, really well to me. And I was invested in Fred after this in a way that I hadn't been, because I'd found him annoying up to this point.
Yeah, I really loved the way this was done, but I found myself getting frustrated because I was like, oh, this is just targeting, from an audience perspective, random people. This isn't going to be just about our kids and something personal between the Upside Down and them, whoever that ends up being. We're opening this up to a bunch of random kids now. And I really disliked that. They did it really well, though. Gotta hand it to them there.
That's fair. Thinking about it this time, too, like, this is far from a hot take, but Vecna really leans on shame in particular. Like, that's one of the things that all of them have. All of Vecna's victims.
Shame or guilt.
Yeah. A lot of trauma is associated with death, so there's a lot of survivor's guilt that comes with that. So, but it was just something I hadn't really picked up on until this watch. And I love particularly the visual metaphor of the scar on Fred's face opening up, because
oh yeah,
while that is specific to Fred, like, this is what Vecna does. He literally opens old wounds, you know, albeit mental ones.
Yep.
I like that serves as a metaphor for all the victims.
For sure. Yeah.
And shout out to to Jeff Sprov as Officer Glenn Daniels here. Like I really like him.
Right.
Like he's good. Like both.
Yeah.
Like and particularly from the sense of like this happens, but he as his actual self, not as his Vecna, projection. I still like trust him after this. Like, you know what I mean?
Right.
It doesn't like affect how he's portrayed as himself. Like I'm like, oh no, he seems to genuinely be worried later on when Nancy approaches him. So much so that I wonder what he would have been like in earlier seasons. And hopefully, if he didn't die in this finale, he'll be back for season 5. That'd be cool.
Yeah, for sure.
I'd like to see him in season 5 again.
Yeah.
Again, one of those moments of like a very, very minor character being cast really well and making a very distinct impression. And then this scene where Nancy talks to Wayne, Eddie's uncle, her side of it, not necessarily getting into the stuff with Fred. I love this sequence. This is probably one of my favorite scenes from season 4. I like the fact that Wayne introduces the Creel family into the canon along with the killing methods. Yeah, I like how much characterization we get with Wayne in this brief exchange, and Joel Stoffer in the role is terrific.
Gosh, I'm so annoyed the way that she approaches him. She's so entitled. Oh my God, this person just witnessed something terrible, and you're literally a high schooler coming up to somebody like, I'm a journalist. Let me talk to you about your trauma that you just went through, when you have no idea what you're doing. She's taken some high school journalism classes, but that's not qualifications,
Yeah.
I think she does okay, but I don't really like the writing for how she approached him. I guess it worked out, and I do like what the rest of that, the way he introduces the Creel house. I think that really worked, but it just bugged me.
Yeah, you're right. She is still a kid. She is a high schooler. It's very easy to forget that,
right?
Especially later on. But the part that I like is the way that she shifts gears when she says, "Let me tell your side of the story," because he has been bugged by journalists all day.
Yeah.
Especially because they talk about the Hawkins Post. I like that as a follow-up to season 3.
She's able to leverage that for her own gain.
Yeah, the scene, I love the spookiness of this side of the scene. Like, I remember watching it for the first time and thinking that it felt new, but in a way that I really liked. Like, Wayne is telling her a spooky story, and almost like a ghost story, an urban legend, like a haunted tale. And that felt new for Stranger Things, and in a way that I don't feel like we've really seen before or since, frankly. Like, even the stuff in the Creel house, like it's all very different. And I like how distinct it feels, like from the angles and the whole visual style. It's just, it's different, but in like a way that doesn't feel out of place. And I enjoy it. I just really enjoy this whole sequence.
Well, yeah, I think most of the Creel house stuff is probably my favorite plot line throughout the season.
Far and away.
It's the strongest. It's the most fun to dig into, and this was a good intro. Solid.
Yeah. The side with Fred, though, is a lot more heavy-handed.
Jeez. I see. Here's something that I really didn't like. The way that like he was just some goofy kid, and he even looks, kind of goofy with the big glasses, and he's so skinny, and he just looks like that 80s nerd, and I kind of expected his character to just kind of be some funny side character for the short amount of time we'd probably get to know him. And then that happens to him, and it's like, oh my God, the tone, that's another tone dissonance thing for me.
I mean, I love the way it's fused, seeing what happens to him fused, for the moving into the ending of the episode, like the fusing with the stuff with, Max and Steve and Dustin and Eddie and all that, like that, like the reveal, if you can call it that, of like Vecna's curse, the titular Vecna's curse.
That was very cool.
That works, but I'd see what you're getting at. Like the transition into that is a little bit jarring.
He's this goofy kid, and then suddenly Officer Vecna Daniels is like, "You killed those people." Like, what the fuck?
Well, for me, the jarring part is like the people in full like creepy makeup, like just standing around in the woods. Like that almost felt silly. Like that almost took me out of the moment. to borrow the term that you've already used, it's melodramatic.
They were going for that horror element, which I appreciate.
It's not, I don't feel like it's their strongest use of horror elements in the show. Like when they shift into like the recreating the accident and then him falling into the grave and then seeing Vecna, like that's our first time seeing him, and like that all works really well. Like that all felt properly scary and creepy.
Yeah.
And then we get that shot of him in the upside down, which like they're asking Eddie about, did you see dust particles? Like anything like that. And so it seems like at first we're saying there's no connection to the upside down. Even Max saying back again, like it was a nice reminder that, yeah, they thought it was over at the end of season 3. Like they'd closed the new gate, they'd killed off the meat flayer, case closed, right? So that this would feel like, hang on, what's going on? But then the end reveal of Vecna in the upside down, like those elements all like happening at once, I thought was really nicely put together.
Yeah, definitely.
And I still like it.
Yeah.
How does the metaphor of Vecna's curse, like the D&D metaphor of it all, the connecting the dots, how does that work for you?
So I kind of like that there's a D&D antagonist in each season. I think that's kind of cool. I think that they take it for granted, though. They start to take the metaphor for granted. And I think they start to do that more in season 3, and season 4 is just more and more of that, They lean on it a little bit too heavily, I think.
I think that this connection worked a lot more strongly for me on a first viewing. I still buy it, but it feels a little bit like a reach, mostly coming from Eddie. I like the idea that it's someone other than the kids, air quotes on kids at this point, using the D&D metaphor. But in this context, trying not to look ahead, this does feel more literal than it has in the past, rather than just a metaphor. But what it does do is it does set up the idea that this is someone with powers. And I hadn't really thought about this until I was like taking notes for this, which having the powers be involved makes it kind of different from all the previous baddies, or so we thought. I had never really considered before that the mind and meat flayers probably had some sort of powers in order to possess and or destroy people from a distance, but I think my previous assumption was that it was a like physical possession, like rather than psychological or like arcana,
well, yeah,
as it were.
That's what I thought too.
So I like this as foreshadowing for bringing all of those threads together.
Yeah.
From a writing perspective specifically, I got to admit I'm really impressed with that.
Yeah.
Because that's something that like, we have talked about how like they were backed into a corner. They made a lot of writing decisions that don't make sense. There's a lot of stuff they don't follow through on, but I gotta give credit where it's due. Like this was a nice touch.
Yeah.
Unless of course I'm totally wrong and I'm like, I'm missing something completely. But
no, I think you're right. This is definitely some kind of foreshadowing, like those kids, like 11.
Well, and yeah, it is. It's a huge hint towards him being one. Like never in a million years would I have caught that on my first watch, but it's very clear now, like that's what's got to be being set up. And that's not a criticism. I actually like that. Because even though we get to see as the audience that Vecna's in the upside down, they don't. So that piece of information is just for us.
And that's why I was a little annoyed. Like you said, it did feel like a bit of a reach for them to say that. Like, really? Okay, fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll let it go.
Yeah. The tone does a lot of the heavy lifting. The performances do a lot of the heavy lifting.
Oh yeah.
And the rest of, all that stuff that I just said, like the tying all of those threads together works really well, and that makes up for it, I think.
Yep. Oh yeah.
Yeah. It's
That's
just
really good.
The connection's a little more flimsy, I think, this time. Well, but I also buy it a little more this time because they have been steeped in Dungeons and Dragons, whereas opposed to season 3, they'd been like, we're too cool for this now. So like using that metaphor, Eddie getting it feels like they're trying to say he's on board
Yep.
He's
Yeah.
with them, he's on the same page, and they'll
He's
be
part of the
able,
team.
yeah, well, and they can communicate to him using that language. So yeah, it all ultimately works. It was just, again, looking at it critically, I was like, does this actually hold up? Like, it's fine, it doesn't bother me as a from a viewing standpoint, but it was like,
Just with tone, it's a very strong end to the episode.
yes. So that's the end of the episode. So final thoughts on chapter 2, Vecna's Curse.
I gotta go say again, this was very frustrating to rewatch and just remember all the frustrating things about this whole season and this whole series too. It's just another, keep remembering just how close they were to making something like, oh my gosh, it could have been so phenomenally good. And instead it's like, oh my God, why did you do this? Why did you do that? Just over and over and over again.
On first watch, the end of chapter 2 was my first pause in watching season 4. Like, we'd watched 1 and 2 back to back, and it was very hard to stop and wait until the next day to continue. In spite of how messy I felt about a lot of the stuff, with Elle and with all of that stuff, and with Hopper and being confused and whatnot, like, I still liked the setup. I really think that the Hawkins plot is ultimately, it's still a great start, in no small part due to that Hawkins arc. It carries, as you've said, so much of this season.
Yeah.
And I mean, it starts right here. I mean, it really starts here.
Oh yeah.
And I liked,
finally.
yeah. And I liked the feeling of building towards something.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I was also kind of overwhelmed by that last shot. It seemed like we were amping up really fast to something insurmountable to our heroes. And that's something I want to circle back to as the podcast goes on. But I remember already having changed my mind a lot about Eddie. We didn't talk about him too much in this episode because he doesn't really appear until the very end. But I was pretty sure that I could like him at this point, but I was still dubious about how he was going to mesh with everyone, which is, given what we just said about, like, them being able to be on the same page, like, I'm surprised that didn't register that much, but
it probably was overwhelming at that point, even, because that was towards the end of that episode.
Well, and what does this mean going forward? Like, okay, he believes them. He believes that they believe him, and he can speak the language with the D&D. But, like, how is that going to track when he talks about, with all of the rest of it,
Right.
I did like how they were handling his reaction to Chrissy's death, though. The show didn't seem to be chastising him at this point for being frightened and distraught, and he doesn't come across as weak. By contrast, very much not a great continuation with the California crew. Like, I do like this episode overall a lot, but it does, which is obviously where we differ, I think, but, like, a lot of the stuff that I like, for me, outweighs the stuff that I don't. But yeah, the California crew stuff, it does sort of establish a tone that I think will persist. You mentioned Elle's arc in general. It does splinter off, and I'll address that as such as we move forward. But this is just such a messy season, and with that, and it continues to feel like they just didn't have an airtight control over that storyline that they do with the others.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that continues to shape up as we proceed. I mean, we talked about Jason, but I love the way that his plot is developing and beginning. And I know not everyone does, including someone who will be joining me in a future episode. But I find that arc, I find him as a character very compelling, insofar as him being, as we discussed, that, like, street level antagonist.
Yes, definitely. I mean, this episode overall was still very compelling. It's frustrating, but it's still so compelling. Yeah.
With that said, that concludes our contemplation on Chapter 2, Vecna's Curse. As always, thank you for listening. And if you've got comments, questions, or thoughts, you can join the conversation. We're on TikTok and Instagram. Links are in the show notes. Or you can shoot us an email. If you've been enjoying the podcast, please consider leaving a review. Coffee and Contemplation is available wherever you get your podcasts.
Over and out.
Things, though, where I think back to what you said, like, just want to see them living their lives.
I just need a relationship that isn't meaningless sex. You're like 19, dude. Calm down. That does get me.